hey, when things are tough, I feel like it is important to have that optimism. And when things are maybe not as tough, keep reminding people, yes, we're celebrating and we're going to enjoy this win. We need to celebrate this win. At the same time, there's still work to do. Juice.
Hello.
Hello. So thank you so much for joining us. I heard you had midterms you were knocking out. How are you doing?
Oh, I may or may not have waited to the last minute to do a couple of them, but I did them. I passed them. Well, more than passed them. And now I'm just glad that I'm free and I can actually do work that I like doing. Well, I don't want to say that. I like my classes, but this is more of like recreational theory
Mm-hmm.
reading than as opposed to like reading for a class or something. You know, it's a different thing. Even if you don't enjoy them both, it's just like I don't
I'm
know, I
choosing
like
to
having
do
some
this one.
conversation. Yeah, exactly.
No, I totally feel you on that. I totally feel you on that. By the way, chat, thank you so much for the hype train. I am going to shut off the alerts for now because we're going to pop into this reading. So we're going to go ahead and get on that. And thank you for
Of
joining us,
course.
Juice. I really
Yeah.
appreciate that.
I'm gonna put my phone off to the side because if I'm gonna keep reading chat, just instinctively looking down goes my mod brain. Um,
I know that
but you,
feeling. You probably see
mhm,
me, streamer brain. I'm like in the middle of a sentence and then I'm like, sorry, chat, you distracted me.
mhm,
Oh, okay. So, are you down to read this for us?
absolutely.
All
I'm
right.
super excited to get into this.
We will be following along. I will follow with my cursor. And if you want to get into it, feel free to stop as you feel comfortable and you want to have a conversation on something, and we'll just get through this. Let's go. Oh, wait. This is a
Hmm.
piece you chose. Why did you
It
choose this
is.
piece? Would you mind
So
introducing?
yeah, so we've talked about double consciousness a couple times here and there in chat, and we've mentioned the work of W.E.B. Du Bois in doing so. But I feel like as one of the more prominent uh, Black scholars and leaders, I'll say leaders in this context, of this time period during the Jim Crow era, his work is to me incredibly undeniably very influential, but I feel like a lot of it was a product of or spoke very closely to the time period in which he was studying under. When I say that, I mean that his work, especially in terms of double consciousness, I think speaks directly to the state of Black folk during the Jim Crow era. Specifically, this piece, which he wrote for the Atlantic or published in by the Atlantic in 1897, which for contextual sake was 1 year after Plessy v. Ferguson. So those separate but equal doctrine that the Supreme Court ended up propagating through the U.S. Constitution.
Hmm.
So that was like, in my to my understanding, that was one of the more uh, say contentious parts uh, of America, or at least like Jim Crow era America, and led to some very interesting theory about the state of Black people as we envision ourselves through our self-conscious. And yeah, I just want to go through it and share with what I've kind of thought about it and get what Chet's opinion on it, and of course yours as well.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I could see that being a very contentious time right now with all the like anti-trans legislation. It feels like there's a lot of tension that impacts everyone. That becomes it really inflames the discourse around things and leads up to a lot of tension. So that makes a lot of sense. All right,
Mhm.
I'm ready to start when you are.
All right. Um, it's called Strivings of the Negro People, and I'll I'll start with just like the little quote that he has uh on the top. So it dawned upon me with a certain suddenness that I was different from the others, or like mayhap in heart and life and longing, but shut out from their world by a vast veil. Um, and then that's within the a quote from the passage that we'll get to. But I'm ready to start it if you are.
Absolutely.
All right, let me take some water real quick. Between me and the other world, there is ever an unasked question, unasked by some through feelings of delicacy, by others through the difficulty of rightly framing it. All, nevertheless, flutter around it. They approach me in a half hesitant sort of way, eye me curiously or compassionately, and then instead of saying directly, "How does it feel to be a problem?" they say, "I know an excellent colored man in my town," or "I fought at Mechanicsville," or "Do not these southern outrages make your blood boil?" At these I smile, or am interested, or reduce the boiling to a simmer, as the occasion may require. To the real question, how does it feel to be a problem? I answer seldom a word. And yet, being a problem is a strange experience, peculiar even for one who has never been anything else, say perhaps in boyhood and in Europe. It is in the early days of rollicking boyhood that the revelation first burst upon one, all in a day, as it were. I remember well when the shadow swept across me. I was a little thing, away up in the hills of New England, where the dark Housatonic winds between Hoosac and Tugonic to the sea, and a wee wooden schoolhouse. Something put it into the boys and girls' head to buy gorgeous visiting cards, 10 cents a package, and exchange. Exchange was merry, till one girl, a tall newcomer, refused my card, refused it peremptorily, with a glance. Then it dawned upon me with a certain suddenness that I was different from the others, or like, mayhap, in heart and life and longing, but shut out from the world by a vast veil. That's the quote I just read earlier. I had thereafter no desire to tear down that veil, to creep through. I held all beyond it in common contempt, and lived above it in a region of blue sky and great wandering shadows. That sky was bluest when I could beat my mates at examination time, or beat them at a foot race, or even beat their stringy heads. Alas, with the years all this fine contempt began to fade, for the world I longed for and all its dazzling opportunities were theirs, not mine. Where they should not keep these prizes, I said. Some, all, I would wrest from them. Just how I would do it, I could never decide. By reading law, by healing the sick, by telling the wonderful tales that swam in my head. Some way. With other black boys, the strife was not so fiercely sunny. Their youth shrunk into tasteless sycophancy, or into silent hatred of the pale world about them, and mocking distrust of everything white. It wasted itself in a bitter cry. Why did God make me an outcast and a stranger in my own house? The shades of the prison house close round about us all, walls straight and stubborn to the whitest, but relentlessly narrow, tall, and unescalable to sons of night, must plod darkly against the stone, or steadily, half hopelessly, watch the streak of blue above. You can stop there for a second because that was a whole lot.
That was a
Uh,
lot. That was a lot. Also, you were moving so fast. I'm like, shoo!
oh, sorry. I That's how I read like in my mind. I gotta learn to slow down a bit.
If you would like
So,
to, go for it, but don't stress too much about it. Yeah, so is that I assume chat you're following, right? This opening feels pretty simple. Um, so I noticed you mentioned at the beginning, like in your intro, this is very relevant to the times. But do you feel like some of the elements are still feel similar? Because I know it echoes for me that recognition that people still have when they run into racism.
yeah, so I think especially in the beginning where he's talking about the reactions that he get, the way that people approach him. Uh, I I still feel like at this point in 2022, people still treat instances of racism as if it's not like endemic to the society that we live in. And they use that those whenever it does pop up into their worldview. Um, and this is speaking from largely from experience. They'll come to in this case black people about their opinions about like what's going on. Like it's as if we are arbiters of truth and insight into exactly what's going on. Like
Hmm.
this is something that they recognize that we'd more than likely have some like a personal insight into these sort of instances of bigotry. But at the same time, it's kind of like, well, the fact that you're just now like taking notice of these things, and then you expect me to on a dime just drop like some insightful adage or some sort of like eye-opening experience to tell you is just it's a lot of unnecessary pressure put upon us.
Mm.
And I yeah like and I feel like people this isn't necessarily, I mean, it is unique in the way that it presents it for like racialized people, but it's definitely something that other people who occupy other marginalized identities can relate to as well. Especially in spaces that where like for quote unquote like progressive spaces.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely, like yesterday, I noticed I got frustrated because I talk about trans issues,
Hmm.
but I don't have all the insight into trans sports, for example. Um, and so I definitely hear you on that frustration of, oh, I can't solve this problem. I can't give you the deep insight that you need. We can have a discussion. I
Hmm.
can talk about, the impacts. For sure, for sure. One of the things that stuck out to me, I'm curious how you feel about it, because I was thinking about it again in terms of specifically transness because of something that happened yesterday. I ran into someone being blatantly, openly transphobic in public, and I didn't know how to deal with that. So I was trying to calm myself because I was getting a very physical reaction. They were being very loudly transphobic. And I tried to sit down and talk to them, but it was just such blatant and unrecognized transphobia. And I noticed I tried to step across that and tried to make a connection, and it just missed so hard. It was such a shocking moment. Do you, in this piece, something that was so, and I debate for myself constantly is, do you try to step over, cross that so-called veil? Um,
I think I think if you have that inclination inherent to you to try to connect with people, um, it can be easier to sort of like try and step across that veil, step across that boundary, and meet people where they are.
mhm.
I struggle with this a lot in like over the years because I'm not a very combative person.
Yeah.
Um, how you see me now is how I usually am. But then like when if in the very relatively few times where somebody has been like openly and like loudly and hatefully bigoted, um, my natural inclination is to like tune that person out and like remove
Yeah.
myself from that situation just because like I'm not good at uh addressing conflict as it's happening,
Mm.
um because like I'm also very like socially anxious person,
Yeah, that's
and
fair.
a lot of times that gets the better of me and I kind of just like freeze up. um and
Understandable.
yeah, and like not everybody. I'll put it this way, like not everyone's built for that, right? Some people are just good at uh, keeping a level head in those high intense situations. And if you're one of those people, then, you know, by all means, work in a way that doesn't impact your own personal safety. And I certainly wouldn't blame somebody for trying to like remove themselves from a situation if they
Hmm.
know that they cannot handle like loud yelling or like
Oh yeah.
potentially violent people around them. Because at the end of the day, like you putting yourself in a situation where you know you can't handle it is doesn't help anybody. Of course, if, and this is in the case of people that are being uh, what that was in all the criteria that I said before. You know, if it's something more serious than that, then like actual threat of physical violence, of course, address that as is necessary. But
Hmm.
um, yeah, no, like personally, it's just I I flourish more in situations where I'm just sitting down and having a conversation with somebody, and they say something like that they didn't intend to be bigoted or they don't realize is rooted in some kind of bigoted mindset. And then just like calmly having a conversation and explaining to them, okay, well, this is, you said this, but this is what this actually means.
When
And
there's
doing
all,
that,
oh, sorry.
mhm, yeah, yeah, and in doing that, trying to establish like some sort of rapport with the other person. And I know you're very good at that, um, with just dealing with people in chat. Uh, Better
Some
than me in a
days.
lot of cases. Well, yeah, everybody, yeah, everybody has their limit, you know. Like
Yeah,
some people you just
absolutely.
can't, you're not gonna be able to.
Some people you're just like, okay, we hit that
Hmm.
limit. But yeah, I definitely resonate with you on that. I was rehashing it with chat and thinking about it and thinking about, well, how do other people handle this and what are the best ways to handle it? And I realized the part of the reason I felt so comfortable is because I'm non-binary. There's a bit of a difference. They're not going to see me and think, "Oh, you're trans." So there's a difference than if they're being like openly racist against someone who's obviously racialized by society, and the handling that situation is a lot more difficult. But even with that, I noticed even if I'm not someone that you look and go, oh, well, that person's obviously trans, I still get nervous and I still feel like, well, what will be assumed? But I think you really hit the point well with like, take care of yourself, know what you can, know what your limits are, because there's really no help in putting yourself in situations you're just not gonna feel capable in. Um,
Hmm.
I definitely hear you on that.
You know, not everybody's a frontline fighter. You know, we have healers as well as facilitators that have their
Absolutely.
place in this in our activism. So
Mhm.
just knowing where you fit in that is very important.
Huge degree on that. 100%. Did you want to continue, or were there any other points you wanted to pull from this specific section?
No, we can keep going.
All right.
Yeah. After the Egyptian and Indian, the Greek and Roman, the Teuton and Mongolian, the Negro is a sort of seventh son, born with a veil and gifted with second sight into this American world, a world which yields him no self-consciousness, but only lets him see himself through the revelation of the other world. It is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, the sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. One feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body, whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. The history of the American Negro is this history of this strife, this longing to attain self-conscious manhood, to merge his double self into a better and purer self. In this merging, he wishes neither of the older selves to be lost. He does not wish to Africanize America, for America has too much to teach the world, and Africa. He does not wish to bleach his Negro blood in a flood of white Americanism, for he believes foolishly, perhaps but fervently, that Negro blood has yet a message for the world. He simply wishes to make it possible for a man to be both a Negro and an American without being cursed and spit upon by his fellows, without losing the opportunity of self-development. Um, I mean, we hit it. We hit the elucidation on the double consciousness um, concept here. So I guess we can stop and talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. The one feels his two-ness. Is that where you're getting like the and diving into that unreconciled, warring ideals?
Hmm.
That's an interesting one.
Yeah. So like in this is kind of what I was talking with earlier, in that this, I believe, very accurately speaks to Black folk during this time, specific time period, especially. Because again, this was still in the 1800s, technically. The Civil War was one generation, one or two generations earlier. Um, his parents and the parents of many people of his age group were slaves,
Mhm.
and they were still experiencing that kind of like erasure of their African identity to adopt one of racial blackness and Americanism. Um, and in that, it speaks it, it speaks truth to me, with that context in mind. Um, I think as this sort of like core insight that he brings in this passage, I feel like ought to be expanded on in a sort of like wider framework for use in analyzing how uh, Black people we experience our self identity as uh, American citizens today. And this could actually go through like any Black people across the diaspora that are in like colonized nations
Mm.
as well. Uh, Jamaica for me as well in that. And we can look to different parts of our identity that are marginalized and multiplicitous, and say that perhaps double consciousness doesn't isn't the most apt term or most apt like lens to analyze our self identity, um, as we are in today in the conversation we're having right now. We can identify different parts of our identity that influence the way that we view ourselves and the way that we're socialized. For me, that would be me being black, me being a black man, and then me being gay, me being pan. But then also like, so that's the three like ones that immediately stick out to me. But then as I was reading this yesterday, I was thinking like, well, I'm American citizen,
Mhm.
but I'm also the child of Jamaican immigrants, and that brings about a different kind of socialization and internal I don't know if struggle is the right word, but it's like a different kind of internal self thought. And it's kind of redundant to say out loud, but I think that that's the best way I can articulate it. Um, because my experience is unique for being uh, a black person with my background, because I have the cultural insight of being growing up as a black kid in America, and being around like American black culture.
Mhm.
Uh, but then also like I have my Jamaican and West Indian culture that I was able to experience. And growing up in a certain part of Florida where a lot of Caribbean people live, and then also going to stay in Jamaica for different periods of my life, and being around my family there. That's a whole different kind of black cultural experience, of course. And even in that has its own sort of warring, so to speak, consciousness because of the way that because you'd be going straight from a country that is where you're a minority into a country where you're the majority, but still is was a colonized nation. So there's still like British influence that
Mhm.
you're having to deal with and adapt to a certain degree to in being there. So yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is that like double consciousness can work to a degree, but I feel like for us that identify ourselves in different uh or are conscious of ourselves like different parts of our identity and how they shape our way of going through the world. Um, we could say a triple or quadruple or quintuple whatever consciousness to more accurately describe that experience. If that I hope that makes sense. That was kind of like going through a lot of different ideas in that.
No, absolutely. I guess I wanted to dig in and perhaps ask a few questions. Um, I think so. Do you feel like is it cultural differences on top of them being hard to, like how America treats Black American culture, for example, in creating kind of conflict there? Do you feel like that's where like that sense of double consciousness comes in? Um,
Sorry, say that one more time. I looked at chat for a second and
oh
saw
no,
some
did you have
scribbles.
streamer brain chat?
Yeah,
And which, by the way,
I
chat, if you have
did. I
questions
did.
or comments that you want to add, get involved in the conversation. And I'll pull Juice. You can join me in having streamer brain and peek over at chat occasionally, or I'll grab anything that I see as addressing you or as potentially relevant. Either way works, but I was
Yeah.
asking, like, that sense of double consciousness, do you feel like it comes out of a combination of like cultural differences on top of how America as a whole treats, for example, Black American culture, or perhaps I feel like a lot of people aren't like super. When I say a lot of white people, a lot of people, I'm thinking like from my own perspective as someone who grew up in the Midwest, like Jamaica didn't come up. I feel like there's a fair amount of America that has like, maybe this is very Midwest and very white perspective, but like not familiar with other cultures. And so it kind of gets swept up as well. And I was wondering if that like bit of hostility, do you feel like that plays into the double consciousness, or do you feel like it comes from primarily just cultural differences not quite being reconciled? What are your thoughts on that?
I think you can point to both of those
Mm,
points. As you said, for one, Jamaican culture is for a lot of America is diluted to like Bob Marley, Rastafarianism, and then like or a version of Rastafarianism, say, and then smoking weed. Um, And in that, I know I've had to deal with people's perceptions of that growing up, and even still nowadays,
Mhm.
and saying that, you know, that isn't that's the commercialized view of the Caribbean and Jamaica, and is not indicative of the culture as a whole.
Mhm.
So like going through that and having to deal with people's like perceptions once they realize that I belong to that group. Um, it like I said, it brings to mind more of like just another layer of another veil that I have to cross. And a lot of people have I know a lot of Caribbean people have to cross in dealing with American people. And then also like certain aspects of Black culture as well is just still to this day given the same kind of like ignorant treatment
Mhm.
or ignorant view by people who don't have any real like connection beyond what they see in the media or
Mhm.
what they see in like commercialized and diluted aspects that are very disseminated uh, through media, mainstream media. Um, so this all points to me is points to just all the different ways of like Black people are often socialized in America. Um, and you see it more um as from my experience, you see it more as you interact with white people, and perhaps less if you're able to grow up in an environment where you're not completely bombarded with these questions or with this sort of treatment. And
Mhm.
in that, I feel like that would require you to live in very insulated communities. And there are a lot of those communities out there, of course. Um, in Florida, that was kind of kind of one of them. Um, so it is to it's I don't feel like it's endemic necessarily to all Black experiences because of course we're not a monolith. Um,
Mhm.
but it does come up to like it varies depending on like your proximity uh and I feel like to white America, um and just like growing up in that sort of environment.
Mhm. Um, so first off, we have a comment in chat, and I'd be curious your thoughts. Magos Informatics says, I feel like everybody does portray multiple selves to some extent. I don't think I've seen a teenager who's exactly the same with their parents as in their peer group. But yeah, the consciousness processing of those code switches doesn't always click, or how dramatic they can be for others. What are your thoughts? I
Yeah,
am.
no, yeah, go ahead. I've been talking for a while. I'm
No,
good.
that's fine. I was actually, I don't know if we can bring it together and kind of mesh it with talking about the LGBT experience. Because you mentioned feeling kind of a similar double consciousness regarding like LGBT things.
Hmm.
And I guess I don't know if I experience like the same level with being non-binary, because I think it's probably quite a different experience. But it almost feels like sometimes I'm just operating in a very straight cis world. And I just I'm assumed to be straight and cis too. So I think the experience is a bit different, but it's a lot of like, I almost feel like I'm kind of betraying myself at points because I give up. I'm just like, okay, this is how it's going to be today. Like, and then I also feel like a lot of times I've lacked being able to connect to like an LGBT culture, but I know that there's so much to learn there. And so maybe I'm almost lacking in an area, and that creates its own difficulties. But I'm curious, like, what are Do you feel like what are your thoughts on what Magos is getting at? And what are your thoughts on like double consciousness and your experience as an LGBT person?
Yeah, I feel like there's the way that you are, like your sense of self identity with,
Mhm.
and then the way that you choose to express that with other people. And that very much varies depending on your comfortability with yourself as well as the people around you. And then of course the kind of environment that you're in. That's where we get and they mentioned in their comment, but code switching, where people feel the need to put on their certain aspect of themselves, or perhaps even a facade in some cases, um, to navigate a certain world or a certain environment. Um, Personally, I, 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 I've kind of gone through this a bit through as like growing up. Um, just like the way that I talk about certain concepts with black people is going to speak to I'm just being honest, is going to speak to in a different way than I do with just non-black people. Just because I for a lot of things I don't have to like over explain, or I don't have to like, or I don't feel like I have to over explain these things um, around certain conversations around like my experiences, my identity. Um, Even more so with black uh, queer people. Um, yeah, like it's not it shouldn't have to be that way. We shouldn't be socialized to have such uh, experiences that are such unique experiences that oftentimes aren't that are detrimental. Um, but I feel like for a lot of for marginalized people, that is a lot of what this is a little corny, but this is what keeps us together, or what like brings us together, is those like shared experiences that aren't that are largely negative. But then also there's beauty in certain other experiences that we have, like creating culture in spite of our disparagement, um, is a wonderful thing, and
Mhm.
we've all been able to do that in so many different ways. Especially nowadays with like how social media is, and the different like subcultures, countercultures, just like different like groups of people that have been able to find community with each other is fantastic. Um, so yeah, I do sympathize with that. When I was growing up, very it wasn't as good or as glamorous as it is now. But I am kind of glad that like we have this ability to form these groups and to be form these groups and form these communities with each other.
Absolutely. Raleigh was just saying, and I have a question I want to add on with that. How is the experience of affluent Black America different than Black people in America with regards interacting with whiteness and dealing with contradictions of the American dream? And then on top of that, I was kind of thinking, like, I think that what Magos was getting at perhaps is like, okay, well, we all have some levels of, I don't know if I want to say code switching, but switching we do in our day-to-day lives. And some of that's not a big deal. Some of that's just us flowing between this like these different beautiful elements of ourselves. I guess like what Raleigh was getting at though, and perhaps, and I'm curious your thoughts on it, was like the issue that I think I run into as a queer person is that marginalization, feeling like the other, feeling misunderstood in a way that it's like, okay, well, you're the problem with America. And he opens his like the thing with how does it feel to be, what does he say, a problem, I think. I think
Yes.
that feels so at the core of it, that American identity being centered around, this assumption of the white, straight, cis, monogamous, specific, like all these specific ideas we have around, or a lot of people have around America that are so excluding. And then also having all of these negative views on top of that of your other identity. So I think where he says he does not wish to Africanize America, for America has too much to teach the world in Africa. He does not wish to bleach his blood in a flood of white Americanism. Almost feeling like they have to come into conflict rather than like mingle together beautifully. I don't know if that made sense. Are
No,
you
I
following
get
me?
you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like they don't have to be constantly being at war with each other. Like we could be building more of a cohesive like existence, but you
but
know,
but obviously like there's a lot of struggle and difficulty in doing so because of, for example, in, as you were saying, in his time, there was this whole separate but equal stuff unfolding, and this exclusion, this like push to exclude, that I think forces you into a more difficult double consciousness.
yeah, it's a lot,
It is.
honestly.
Yeah.
Even just like rereading it now is just like I I'm re-examining like all of how I view like my self-identity and like
Hmm.
different going back to like different instances throughout my life that I've had to like show myself in a certain way. I feel like I needed to show myself in a certain way that wasn't fully authentic to my full identity.
So, do you think the issue in that is like when we're hiding, not choosing, oh, I want to present myself this way, but like actively, oh, I need to present myself this way for this person or for this group?
Yeah, it's that pressure to do this in order to survive, in order to navigate a certain like environment that Black people in America largely have been going throughout history as a
Hmm.
defense mechanism and also as a way to like perhaps achieve upward mobility in to some degree. Um, and for affluent Black people, and I can't speak to this experience because I'm not of that social bracket. Um, but like because we live in a society that of course, favors capitalism and capitalist business models, people who are able to sort of like get to the higher rung of society through whatever means, you get more of that pressure to, and this isn't just for Black people, it's just in people in general, that pressure to achieve more wealth and more status around you. And for people that feel like if you're, it's it's one thing if you like come from more humble upbringing and then work your way up to a certain level where you're comfortable and you're able to provide for yourself and for your family without much struggle. But another thing when you're born into that society, a kind of like environment, and that's all you know. Um, I feel like you adopt different kinds of self identity in that. If you're coming from a place where you know is nowhere close to where you are now, you're always going to have that part of you. It's always going to be that pressure to keep that uh like leave that behind or leave that like under wraps while you're dealing with this newer environment for fear of ostracization or losing what you've worked so hard to achieve.
Mhm.
Whereas if you're born into that society, it's kind of like, well, this is all that you know. This is all that you've been able to, like, this is your reality. And anything beyond that is what you've been taught by other people, if that. Oh yeah. So like, I I want to say like, if in that sense, there'd be less pressure for you to uh be a certain way if that is just how you grew up. That's what you know. But once you're able to expand your worldview beyond that, and hopefully you're able to do that um, at some point in your life, um, then that's where that sort of like multiplicitous consciousness comes into play. And then you're like, okay, well, this is like my heritage. This is where like my family's from. This is not the kind of environment that like they're all they're all from and they're all used to. So I need to be able to like I mean like reconcile that these people in this environment that I'm around. Um, and now I'm speaking to be clear, I'm speaking to like the mindset of what I would assume is black African born into wealth. Um, and realizing that the way that you accumulated wealth to where you are today um, is certainly not what your reality would have been or was some just a couple generations before you, and kind of like going through that mindset while
Mm.
you're in this environment is like some people choose to stay. Some people realize that their place isn't really with those people, and then they go back and try to reconnect with or connect with their heritage. um I guess it just depends on like what decision you make from once you start once you have that kind of like self-awareness.
Mm.
um yeah, like it's interesting to think about, but again, like I don't have that kind of like insight to really like speak to it in a very deep and insightful way as I do like other, so
Mm.
it's a
Yeah.
limited scope of my experience in that regard.
Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts on it. um, was there anything else you wanted to pull from this, or did you want to continue the piece?
We can keep going. Yeah, I think because there's still a fair amount that he talks about, and he like breaks this down even more. He speaks some more of what I've talked about, and I feel like if I keep talking, then I'm just gonna like
We're
end
gonna
up
have the whole
repeating my
piece. Yeah.
yeah all of this, because we're here to analyze, we're here to learn, we're here to have conversation. And I'm super happy with where we're going so far, and let's keep going. Um, some more water. This is the end of his striving, be a co-worker in the kingdom of culture, to escape both death and isolation, and to husband and use his best powers. These powers of body and of mind have in the past been so wasted and dispersed as to lose all effectiveness, and it seemed like absence of all power, like weakness. The double-lane struggle of the black artisan, on the one hand, to escape white contempt for a nation of mere hewers of wood and drawers of water, and on the other hand, to plow and nail and dig for a poverty-stricken could only result in making him a poor craftsman, for he had but half a heart in either cause. By the poverty and ignorance of his people, the Negro lawyer doctor was pushed toward quackery and demagogism, by the criticism of the other world toward an elaborate preparation that overfitted him for its lowly task. The would-be black savant was confronted by the paradox that the knowledge his people needed was a twice-told tale to his white neighbors, while the knowledge which would teach the white world was Greek to his own flesh and blood. The innate love of harmony and beauty that set the ruder souls of his people a dancing, a singing, and a laughing, raised but confusion and doubt in the soul of the black artist. But the beauty revealed to him was the sole beauty of a race which his larger audience despised, and he could not articulate the message of another people. This waste of double aims, is seeking to satisfy two unreconciled ideals, has wrought sad havoc with the courage and faith and deeds of 8,000 people, has sent them often wooing false gods and invoking false means of salvation, and has even at times seemed destined to make them ashamed of themselves. In the days of bondage, they thought to see in one divine event the end of all doubt and disappointment. 18th century Rousseauism never worshipped freedom with half the unquestioning faith that the American Negro did for 2 centuries. To him, slavery was indeed the sum of all villainy.
Uh-oh. I think
Its beauty.
we lost you for
Yep.
a moment. We lost you after the sum of all villainies.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Sum of all. Let me. I lost my train of thought there too. Okay, there we go. To him, slavery was indeed the sum of all villainies, the cause of all sorrow, the root of all prejudice. Emancipation was the key to a promised land of sweeter beauty than ever stretched before the eyes of wearied Israelites. In his songs and exhortations swelled one refrain: liberty, and in his tears and curses the God he implored had freedom in his right hand. At last it came, suddenly, fearfully, like a dream. With one wild carnival of blood and passion came the message in his own plaintive cadences. I guess we can stop there again.
Do we want to
'Cause,
shout, "Oh, children, shout, you're free. The Lord has brought your liberty," or did you?
yeah, we can, because I think the first passage is a lot of what I was just talking about.
Mm,
Um, and these next two kind of like, our next couple really like bring it all together
all right.
uh, to a
Yeah.
different point. So, shout, O children, shout, you're free. The Lord has brought your liberty. Years have passed away, 10, 20, 30. 30 years of national life, 30 years of renewal and development, and yet the swarthy ghost of Banquo sits in its old place at the national feast. In vain does the nation cry to its fastest prop. Take any shape but that, and my firm nerves shall never tremble. The freedman has not yet found in freedom his
Oh,
promised land. Whatever of lesser good may have come in these years of change, the shadow of a deep disappointment rests upon the Negro people. A disappointment all the more bitter because the unattained ideal is bounded by, saved by the simple ignorance of a lowly folk.
oh, we really did finish it. Okay.
No, there's a little bit more. There's
Oh,
like,
okay. I thought we finished it. I was like, what? Oh,
I think there's
okay.
like 4 or 5 more
All
passages.
right. I gotcha. All right. The freedman. So there are some parts in this one that kind of lost me. Um, I think it's these powers of body and mind, so wasted, dispersed. I definitely see like there's the discussion of like just the lost, like people not being able to live up to their fullest abilities and all of the like struggle with the artisans and artists trying to articulate like their message. It almost seems like it comes off I think I'm looking the innate love of harmony and beauty that sets the ruder souls of his people, a dancing, a singing, and a laughing, raised but confusion and doubt in the soul of the black artist. For the beauty revealed to him was the soul beauty of a race which his larger audience despised, and he could not articulate the message of another people. That feels very powerful.
That to me speaks to and I feel like he's speaking more towards the sort of role that a lot of black artists and like skilled people that occupy they're able to like bridge that veil and go into different uh parts of society and act as like an ambassador to to the larger groups of people or larger like white society. So like for especially around this time, those people were largely artists, largely musical artists as well as artists of different media or medium. Excuse me. Um, People, I feel like and I've talked about this before in different conversations, but like media is such a powerful way to convey messages to people
Mm-hmm.
and to get across ideas of or ideas and insight into other people's cultures, right? Like what you can't necessarily express in words in a way that people will be able to connect to, you could create in uh, a muse or like some sort of like a mural, uh, some way that people will be able to look, some people, the way people will look at and be able to appreciate and connect to as like an extension of like an aspect of their culture that they're already familiar with, which could be song, which could be, you know, dance, could be, you know, some form of some art form. Um, and I believe Du Bois is saying in this particular passage, in that like because of the of how like double consciousness works in the self-conscious of Black people, that these artists, that these like upper, and this sounds very like classist language, um, very classist, but it kind of like classist overtones a bit, like upper, more like skilled of Black people trying to like bridge that gap is made all the more difficult, and in some cases like impossible in trying to accurately portray or represent their people to larger society.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I feel that uh, to a degree. I know that like when I write poems, um, I try to make them in a way that like they're the message is able to be absorbed by as much as close to a universal audience as I can, while still maintaining the truth that I want to portray towards other people. A truth that isn't just like my truth, but a truth of like in certain cases, like larger Black experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think I do pretty well in that, but sometimes I do feel like, well, I can't make this the way that I want to, because if I do, then it's not gonna be, people aren't gonna understand what I'm talking about
Mm-hmm.
that don't have this specific experience. And I could be wrong about that sometimes. Like I do overthink my art a lot. Um, but other times, like I don't know, I feel like I'm right, but then also like that's not really the point. Like that's beside the point ultimately, because I shouldn't have to have that sort of battling when I make things for
Mm-hmm.
people to be for like public to consume and to like appreciate. Um, and I know like talking to my other artist friends, like that feel to like conform or
Mm-hmm.
compromise your art so that it's better well received, while also like trying to be as authentic as you can and true to yourself as you're able to, um, is a hard struggle. And some days one, and some days some side wins, another days another side wins. And that's even more that's compounded when you're also an artist that does this for a living, and now you have to think about, okay, well, how is this going to be received, and is it going to be received in a way that's going to be able to pay my bills, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lot to consider.
Yeah, I've heard the phrase, you know you've made it when you appeal to white audiences. And it feels like a forced respectability politics almost. And trying to articulate perhaps like a marginalized identity or marginalized identities and those experiences can become more difficult to build that bridge and still feel, I don't want to say authentic, but not losing important pieces, perhaps.
Yeah, the my fear is that I eventually start making writing things that aren't that don't represent me, and I may that like I lose myself in in making the art that I do. Um, I don't think it'll happen. I think I'm pretty well grounded in like my identity, and
Hmm.
I'm able to like navigate that different audiences pretty well. But it is something in the back that is on like the back of my head a lot.
Hmm. Scarlett Ryan said the section about black doctors and lawyers approaching demagogism because of class transformation associated with that upward mobility was super interesting. I was not sure what was meant there in particular. Um, Demagogism, is that them becoming demagogues? Um, More of, because I was reading a little bit about specifically like well, here I want to kind of grab demagogue. That's like a person speaking. Demagogue.
It's like
Oh.
peddling fear is a
Oh.
means to like, control people. Is like I give the example of like Trump was very much invested in demagoguery by like playing on people's prejudices and fear to like
Yeah,
project
appealing.
him as a figure that they're worth listening to.
Yeah, yep. Desires and prejudices of ordinary people rather than by using rational argument. I see.
Hmm.
Hmm. Rhetorically exploit an issue or for political purposes in a way calculated to appeal to the. Ah, yeah, I gotcha. Yeah. I'm always having to Google and. Oh.
Hey, I I'll go through this stuff sometimes and like I know that, but let me just to make sure that I know
Yeah.
what I'm talking about.
It's nice. It's nice to always have that right in front of you.
Hmm.
Um, it is an interesting point, Scarlett. I hear you on that.
Yeah, glad to have you in, Scarlett. Glad you had time to come in and join us today. Really appreciate it.
Um,
Scarlett is my friend, if you remember. She's been in stream for a couple times before.
well, I'm glad to have you
Glad
in.
she's here. Yeah.
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 Franklin
Um. Mhm.
was saying, what are your thoughts on racialized, marginalized folks in predominantly majority culture workplaces and the difficulties in having people who identify with your experiences in those workplaces? I have observed it as an issue with formal equality in workplace versus real equity, especially when racialized people are younger and may not see as many reflective role models and even work friends to connect to. Is that like an experience that you feel you relate to, experience, or
Personally, uh, kind of, to a degree. So like in the workplace, I don't take much, how do I say this? My experiences of be like going through, uh, my like my career as being, or going through like my academic career of becoming a historian. I've actually been able to find a fair amount of other Black people that are within the environments that I'm finding myself in, or just like marginalized people that understand the importance of having us in the field. But even before that, I looked what brought me into the field to begin with was the work that I've been able to absorb from Black scholars and
mm,
thinkers and writers and people that I've studied long beforehand. Um, so in that, and then like finding groups of people that also appreciate those works and like building culture around that. or like steeping myself in culture in that. I'm not as invested in like larger like grad school culture yet.
Mm.
So definitely once I get there, I'm sure I'll experience more of that like, oh, like marginalization in the sense that like, oh, I'm a black person in this like working as an archivist or working as a historical researcher. Um, and then like experience like a level of tokenization in that because ultimately we are still a minority in spaces.
Mm.
Um, so in that sense, what I'm saying is I don't have as much like cultural experience dealing with that in serious and more of like my career as so far, but I know from other people's experience who have gotten to that point in their career as well as like personally talking to them as well as reading through different works of people like Patricia Collins and Angela Davis and Toni Morrison and people who are like well into that have their PhDs or their doctorates um, at a time where black voices were seldom heard in their professions and how like how difficult it is to be able to like express yourself and do like research and have your well heard and to a point feeling like you need to do like twice the work to be even considered an expert to be considered somebody worth listening to.
Mm.
So I'm not looking forward to that, but I know once I do get to that point, I'll be able to speak more to that experience.
Mm-hmm. Got you. Thank you for your thoughts. Do you want to continue on? So we have a few more paragraphs. And I did not mean to keep you for like an hour and a half almost.
Oh yeah. I'll try to like
Whoops.
speed this along a little bit more.
No, no pressure to speed along, but
It's just so much to talk about. It's
it
like I
is.
love it. The first okay, I'll start here. The first decade was merely a prolongation of the vain search for freedom. The boon that seemed ever barely to elude their grasp, like a tantalizing will-o'-the-wisp. Battling and misleading the headless host, the Holocaust of war, the terrors of the Ku Klux Klan, the lies of carpetbaggers, the disorganization of industry, the contradictory advice of friends and foes left the bewildered circle as a new watchword beyond the bold cry for freedom. As the decade closed, however, we began to grasp a new idea. The ideal of liberty demanded for its attainment powerful means. These the 15th Amendment gave him. The ballot, which before he had looked upon as a visible sign of freedom, he now regarded as the chief means of gaining and perfecting the liberty with which war had partially endowed him. And why not? Had not votes made war and emancipated millions? Had not votes franchised the freedmen? Is anything impossible to a power that had done all this? A million black men started renewed zeal to vote themselves into the kingdom. The decade fled away, a decade containing to the freedman's mind nothing but suppressed votes, stuffed ballot boxes, and election outrages that nullified his vaunted right of suffrage. And yet that decade from 1875 to 1885 held another powerful movement, the rise of another ideal to guide the unguided, and another pillar of fire by night after a clouded day. It was the ideal of book learning, the curiosity born of compulsory ignorance, to know and to test the power of the Kabbalistic letters of the white man, the longing to know. Mission and night schools began in the smoke of battle, and the gauntlet of reconstruction at last developed into permanent foundations. Here at last seemed to have been discovered the mountain path to Canaan, longer than the highway of emancipation and law, steep and rugged but straight, leading to heights high enough to overlook life. And I'll do the next one because I think that it goes right into that. Um, up the new path the advance guard toiled, slowly, heavily, doggedly. Only those who have watched and guided the faltering feet, the misty minds, the dull understandings of the dark peoples of these schools, know how faithfully, how piteously these people strove to learn. It was a weary work. The cold statistician wrote down the inches of progress here and there, noted also where here and there a foot had slipped or someone had fallen. To the tired climbers, the horizon was ever dark, the mists were often cold, the Canaan was always dim and far away. If, however, the vistas disclosed as yet no goal, no resting place, little but flattery and criticism, the journey at least gave leisure for reflection and self-examination. It changed the child of emancipation to the youth, with dawning self-consciousness, self-realization, self-respect. In those somber forests of his striving, his own soul rose before him, and he saw himself, darkly as through a veil, and yet he saw in himself some faint revelation of his power, of his mission. He began to have a dim feeling that, to attain his place in the world, he must be himself, and not another. For the first time he sought to analyze the burden he bore on his back, that dead weight of social degradation partially masked behind a half-named Negro problem. He felt his poverty. Without a cent, without a home, without land, tools, or savings, he had entered into competition with rich, landed, skilled neighbors. To be a poor man is hard, but to be a poor race in the land of dollars is the very bottom of hardships. He felt the weight of his ignorance, not simply of letters, but of life, a business of the humanities. The accumulated sloth and shirking and awkwardness of decades and centuries shackled his hands and feet, nor was his burden all poverty and ignorance. The red stain of bastardy, which 2 centuries of systematic legal defilement of Negro women has stamped upon his race, and not only the loss of ancient African chastity, also the hereditary weight of a mass of filth from white warmongers and adulterers, threatening almost the obliteration of the Negro. Uh, I love the way that he like the imagery that he inserts in his writing, in the way that he's able to describe like this time period, or the past like 200 years as of 1897 of enslavement, um, and like capturing that struggle to rise above and to uh, rise above, and also like with the burden of having that, uh, as he puts it, that defilement about identity of being a black person in the U.S., trying to make something of yourself, trying to like gain that knowledge that was restricted of you for so long, um, and to perhaps create that, and perhaps like make a way for upward mobility. And it speaks a lot to his experiences as a black professional person who was able to do, well, just that through his upbringing. Um, yeah, I think his experiences is really like showing in this like past 2 passages we just read.
Yeah, this was powerful, emotional, and it had a lot of, I agree that the writing is I want to say emotional and just, I guess I'm saying powerful again. Did I just repeat that twice? Both
I
of
mean, it
them.
was extremely powerful.
It's um I guess visceral, and yeah, you're right. The imagery is, don't say powerful again. Exquisite. We'll go with
Very,
exquisite.
very much
Um,
so.
hmm. What stands out to you in this particular section? To me, I think it is, I am just wowed by the actual writing itself. And I actually missed reading through this part. I'm not gonna lie, I read the whole first section and I was like, wow, this piece is so good. And now we're here and I'm like, whoa, a whole bunch of new information. It
Hmm.
brings me back to earlier in the piece. There was this interesting part talking about the difficulty of, um, it almost felt like there's always a tinge of classism. I think that racism in America really overlaps with that the classist ideas, the devaluation of certain work. But this, it must, I guess what strikes here is that sense of like, he felt his poverty without a cent, without a home, without land, without tools or savings. He had entered into competition with rich landed skilled neighbors. And all the work just to get into that realization and all the things that had held people back. It's just powerful.
Hmm. Um, and you touched on a point that I was actually going to bring up, because when he
Mhm.
says to be a poor man is hard, but to be a poor race in the land of dollars is the very bottom of hardship. So that's something that we talk about on stream a lot, right? Like there's like when we talk about like intersectionality and how oppression works on our different marginalized identities. So like all people are oppressed for being poor, right? That is a certain level of disparagement that people all I think all people can relate to, or all like racial groups of people can relate to. But then like there's that, and then being a poor black person that, um, or I guess a poor, in this case, a poor black person that brings with itself like very unique struggles, um, and the forms of disparagement that you face that you face like starting from that point, and then as you face trying to get to a point where you can um, hopefully provide for yourself, is just like you're not just fighting the weight of what the world is treating you now. You're fighting with the weight of what society has rested upon you from before you. Um, and now you have to like reconcile that, like where I'm from is built upon, like my situation largely is built upon these systems of oppression that existed long before me, um, and target me specifically because I am a poor black person. As someone, and speaking from experience of growing up as somebody who I didn't come from wealth by any means. Like I said, my parents were immigrants, and came here to work, and to possibly make a living for me and my sibling. Um, I was very much aware of like the the stigma of being a poor like working class black person, but then also like an extra added stigma, and I speak to the multiplicitous identity of double consciousness that we talked about earlier, of like you are also an immigrant of of black people from a different country, or you're a child of immigrants of black people from a different country. So there's an extra stigma that's put onto that you're coming here as, and this is terrible to say, and I don't think it is as present nowadays, but especially when my mom was around my age trying to work, that you are a person who is coming to um, be an exceptional black person.
Mhm.
To have like there's a stereotype of Jamaican people that we work like 13 jobs and work
Mm.
like 180 hours a week, just because we come here
Oof.
to make something of ourselves. And this also extends to African people as well, so like West African people that come to America. Um, and it's just like this expectation that if you're here, and this expectation is brought in part by American society, but as well as like you being like your culture from back home.
Mm.
That when you're in America, when you're in Canada, when you're in the UK or in wherever, that you're here to make money, you're to make something of yourself. And if you're not doing that, if you're not achieving something grand in the land of opportunity, then you are wasting your time. That you're not living up to your potential and utilizing the resources that are here with you.
That's a
Because
lot of.
yeah, it really is. Because we know how, as Jamaican people, we know how things are back in the Caribbean. We know that the gap between the rich and with uh, poor people is so wide and so present within like just such a small country, that that we adopt this a lot of times. We adopt this idea that the only way that we can really make something of ourselves is to go get an education in America, in Canada, in UK, in Britain or wherever, and then use that to, be an example of like what Jamaican people can do if we're given that opportunity. Um, it shouldn't be like that, and I'm glad we're kind of moving away from that
Mm-hmm.
mindset. Um, but it definitely was something that I grew up with from just from like talking to my parents and from like my uncles and my aunts and stuff. Um, yeah, it sucks. It really does.
Mm-hmm.
And and then at the same time, I feel like it's also something that like that's a part of like immigrant experience. Is that you when you come to a new country, you come to do make something of yourself, to succeed, to strive, and to like in a lot of cases make money and then bring that money back home.
So
Um, hmm?
is a part of that, and I thought I was catching you saying this, is like you got this opportunity to come here, and the goal of that opportunity is to do this thing, and that's a level of the pressure. Am I understanding you correctly on that?
Sorry, I was streamer
You were
brain.
doing streamer brain. That's totally okay. I was saying like a level of that pressure is like you came to America, you got that opportunity. And so the point of you doing that, the point of you coming here is to be able to make that money, to be able to do that. And that's kind of, am I understanding you correctly in that?
Yeah, yeah, that's just that's the way that like one of the ways that capitalism affects like immigrants specifically. Um,
Mm,
that like it's not spoken about as much, but like if you are an immigrant, like you're a child of immigrant, you know exactly what I'm talking
mm,
about. Is like the capitalist model of like individualizing success affects people that like aren't born into it, but instead like absorb that like from media, because the opportunities that we assume, I say we, uh, assume are present in America is because of like how media portrays America, right?
mhm,
And because we know that our in our country we don't have those supposed opportunities that like other people here have.
mhm,
So that's why we go. That's part of the reason why we end up moving and you know immigrating and try to make something of our trying to achieve that some semblance of that success we see through like propaganda and media influence.
mhm.
Only to some of us don't ever fully like realize that that is all a facade and that there are plenty of obstacles here that like make it so that people who are poor stay poor.
Mhm.
Um, but I think that a lot of instances it's there's still like that kind of drive to make something of yourselves because like moving from one country to another is a huge deal.
Mhm.
I don't know if I could have done it, especially with like not having much money to your name anyway. Like that's such a courageous embark, and I applaud anybody that's able to like to do that. Like
True. Yeah.
so like it's so when it's a lot of situations you come here with is just like okay well if I'm here I don't have a lot of money I have to do whatever I can to get a foothold to even just start get a place to live, um and then work towards like getting if I can transportation or like being able to do like the bare like amenities that everybody in America should have, but we don't because of the way our society is designed. It's just like it's kind of like a coping thing where it's like, okay, well, things are bad, but I have to do this anyway because this is what I've come here to do, and this is the
Hmm.
kind of like pressure that is put upon me to do this, and I can't miss a beat. I can't stop and to like consider that this is not how people should be living. This
Mm.
is not the kind of like society. Like I shouldn't have this pressure to work, 80 hours a week
Yeah.
to try and, make ends meet and like this should not be necessary for me to make a decent living in this country. But, you know, that's just part of how capitalism uh instills in us.
Absolutely. Um, so understanding that, I was reading, Liquiescence saying that's a social construct fabricated to perpetuate capitalism. I agree with that statement. They continue on, nothing more to it. Once you realize it's just another social construct, there's no need to follow it if you don't like. And I guess my initial reaction was, well, that lacks a lot of empathy for what I thought you were getting at, which is, as immigrants, we came here for this purpose, and it feels misleading. You didn't know what you were getting into. And so, yeah, it's a social construct. We can acknowledge that. But at the same time, it has real implications. You uprooted, like, your family, your parents uprooted their whole lives with this American dream that we know is only there if you're sleeping, to come
Mhm.
here. And I guess I'm wondering, like, what do you is it, would you agree with that response, or do you have a different response of like, yeah, that's a social construct, fuck it? But I guess I have mixed feelings. Like, yes, it's a social construct, but also recognize it's not entirely just, oh, I'm free, because you recognize that there's still, I would imagine, and I could be wrong, but I would imagine there's still that sense of loss, that sense of betrayal, that sense of hurt. Um, what are your thoughts? Because I'm
No, I
just
think you're
talking through my initial responses, thoughts.
no, you think you're right on it with that line of thought in that because I mean we in this chat in
Mhm.
talking in this conversation definitely recognize that all of these things are functions of societal constructs to oppress us in various ways. But when you are out in the world and you have to, you're like in this situation that I described at length, that when you're in a sort of like situation where you need, where like just acknowledging that doesn't really help you, like help your specific situation, like as it's happening.
Mhm.
Um, that like I think about like I understand why people wouldn't work, like wouldn't need the like see it necessary to really even like ponder these things. Um, like ponder like why it is that I'm working like two jobs to make ends meet.
Mhm.
Um, I don't like the fact that it is a social construct is largely superfluous to like how am I gonna afford food for my family by the end of this week.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying that like we essence is trying to say that, but
Yeah.
like my like I said, my initial thoughts is just like, well, improving our material conditions is something that we should all be striving for. But also acknowledging that like where people are is as a product of these social constructs. And simply like acknowledging that doesn't do much to help them and their help them like where they're at. And you need to understand that like why people are so inundated in this like workaholic culture we
Mhm.
have in the U.S.
Mhm.
Or in the West. Um, yeah, it's just like maybe that could have helped. Mm, I don't know. I don't know if it would have helped like when I was growing up as much, because I mean, I guess a little bit, but definitely not in the for like somebody that's been working their pretty much their entire life, or for the vast majority of their lives, and was was largely influenced by like, as I was saying, like media portrayals of America and like how things are. Um, we need people who are able to like get to a point where they can um, have those conversations and facilitate those conversations, and also do that work to help each other out as a community. And that's something that like those kind of initiatives, those kind of like grassroots organization. Now I'm coming off a bit of tangent here, but um, that kind of like is vital for everybody at every level of social status or social standing to contribute to some way. And sometimes it's out of a necessity, you know, poor people coming together to help each other out in whatever ways they can. That's just the way of living in a lower income neighborhood that just happens organically. But then also people who are able to lend more of them, utilize the resources they have available to them. The as Du Bois puts it, the black savants and the doctors, the professionals that were able to get to a point where they don't have to deal with the the oppression of being poor, um, and now have that like part of society opened up to them, or they opened it up for themselves. Um, Ultimately, like that is, in my opinion, that is where we need to like focus our efforts of like improving those material conditions in however way we can with the resources that we have available to us, as opposed to just like acknowledging that these are social constructs um, by itself, right? Like it has to fit into a large framework of activism for it to be like meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
Is how I see it.
I gotcha. Yeah. Thank you for your thoughts. I think let's continue on.
Yeah,
Uh,
you're at
a
a
people?
people. Yeah, a people. A people thus handicapped ought not to be asked to race with race with the world, rather allowed to give all its time and thought to its own social problems. But alas, while sociologists gleefully count his bastards and his prostitutes, the very soul of the toiling, sweating black man is darkened by the shadow of a vast despair. Men call the shadow prejudice, and learnedly explain it as a natural defense of culture against barbarism, learning against ignorance, purity against crime, the higher against the lower races, to which the Negro cries Amen, and swears that so much this prejudice, strange prejudice, as it's founded on just homage to civilization, culture, righteousness, and progress, he humbly bows and meekly does obeisance. But before that nameless prejudice that leaps beyond all this, he stands helpless, dismayed, and well nigh speechless. Before that personal disrespect and mockery, the ridicule and systematic humiliation, the distortion of fact and wanton license of fancy, the cynical ignoring of the better and boisterous welcoming of the worse, the all-pervading desire to inculcated disdain for everything black, from Toussaint to the devil. Before this there rises the sickening despair that would disarm and discourage any nation save that black host to whom discouragement is an unwritten word. Um, they still press on. They still nurse the dogged hope. Not a hope of nauseating patronage, not a hope of reception into charmed social circles of stock jobbers, pork packers, and earl hunters, but the hope of a higher synthesis of civilization and humanity, a true progress with which the chorus peace, good will to men may make one music as before, but faster. Thus the second decade of the American Negro's freedom, period of conflict, of inspiration and doubt, of faith and vain questionings, of Sturm und Drang, The ideals of physical freedom, of political power, of school training, as separate all-sufficient panaceas for social ills, began in the third decade, dim and overcast. They were the vain dreams of credulous race childhood, not wrong, but incomplete and oversimple. The training of the schools we need today more than ever. The training of deft hands, quick eyes and ears, and the broader, deeper, higher culture of gifted minds. The power of the ballot we need in sheer self-defense as a guarantee of good faith. We may misuse it, but we can scarce do worse in this respect than our will home will home masters. Freedom too, the long sought, we still seek. The freedom of life and limb, the freedom to work and think, culture and liberty, all these we need, not singly, but together. For today, these ideals among the Negro people are gradually coalescing and finding a higher meaning in the unifying ideal of race. The ideal of fostering the traits and talents of the Negro, not in opposition to, but in conformity with, the greater ideals of the American Republic, in order that someday, on American soil, two world races may give each to each, those characteristics which both so sadly lack. Already we come not altogether empty-handed. There is today no true American music but the sweet wild melodies of the Negro slave. American fairy tales are Indian and African. We are the sole oasis of simple faith and reverence in a dusty desert of dollars and smartness. Will America be poorer if she replace her dyspeptic blundering with the lighthearted but determined Negro humility, or coarse, cruel wit with loving, jovial good humor, or her Annie Rooney with steal away? Yeah, that I love that whole.
Mm.
We talked about imagery. This writing is so merely a stern, concrete test of the underlying principles of the great republic is the Negro problem, and the spiritual striving of the freedmen's sons is the travail of souls whose burden is almost beyond the measure of their strength, but who bear it in the name of an historic race, in the name of this, the land of their fathers' fathers, and the name of human opportunity.
Oh, and now I think for the second time, we've made it.
Yeah,
This was a good
did it.
one. Okay. Hmm.
I like the optimism in this in optimistic writing
Yes.
in this last couple passages. And a lot of this is what we talked about earlier with like this striving is still like happening regardless of like the acknowledgement of our multiplicitous consciousness and the disparagement that we're able to recognize that ultimately shapes our identities and our existences. Um, and ultimately, in doing that, we'll uplift ourselves as racialized Black people, and I acknowledges that for Indigenous people as well, but also like make America that much more of a society that what people say in theory but not in practice is supposed to be. Um, I mean, I wouldn't have been that optimistic personally. I'm a bit of a pessimist in like how I view America.
Hmm.
Um, but you know, I do recognize the need or the inclination to be more uh optimistic, especially again, this was 1897, a very extremely contentious period during Jim Crow. Um, we doom doom posting would be absolutely justified back then, but then like being able to write in with such like optimistic fortitude is just like it's very inspiring.
Hmm. A little bit of Bloomer, W.E.B. Du Bois as a treat. We all need it to stay here. I
Hmm.
really, what you were hitting at, that section of the hope of a higher synthesis of civilization and humanity, a true progress. That was, yeah, that it is very hopeful. to look into and see, um, especially following up with the look at how people are looking at Black Americans at this point. And I really the other section I just loved the points you might maybe heard me chuckling. Um, the on the ballots and the desire for the vote specifically, we may misuse it, but we can scarce do worse in this respect than our masters, like the
Hmm.
Willem masters.
Yeah, that
Um,
was a good way to articulate that. Like, well, we can't do much worse than white people have been voting for us over now.
like,
So
let us in on this, yeah.
yeah.
Um, and then also the recognition that, yeah, it's just a guarantee of good faith. I think those sections are very powerful,
Hmm.
and really stuck out to me in this piece.
And then this is kind of from what I've gathered from his writing later on. This kind of like optimism, like waxes and wanes as, of course, you go through uh, the Great Depression a few decades later on, and like how that impacted Black people specifically. Um, is like tries to keep that optimism, but at times kind of delves more into the reality of where state of like Black people in America and the kind of disparagement, economic disparagement that they faced back during that time period, um, like into the 20s as well as into the 30s. Um, as anybody would, I feel like anybody who existed in this time period um, would be able to experience. Well, more than likely would have experienced as well. Because I mean, even I have that kind of those instances where I feel like, well, yeah, I'm super excited, super like optimistic, super pumped about whatever's going on in my life and what's going on in like progressive spaces, and then something comes along, and I'm just like, oh, well, I thought we were beyond this, or well, I didn't.
Yeah,
I thought
yeah.
that we could rise above what's going on, but then, well, I guess we haven't done it, created as much progress as we needed, or like, oh, there's another obstacle that we have to go. I'm sure you can relate to that, and Chad can relate to that as
I
um,
definitely, yeah. Sometimes I'm like, what just happened here? Are we not beyond this? And then I'm like, I actually, as you were saying that, it was reminding me, like, I definitely hugely relate to that. Um, but then I'm like, I don't know, I have conflicting feelings because I recognize with my own progress, just as an individual human being, I slide back on certain things. But I'm like, okay, but we still made progress. And I think that's the way of maintaining my own hope rather than just like, oh, well, fuck, we're here. Like we're here again. It's not any better. Um, but at the same time, like I do really relate to that because sometimes it's like the simplest things. Why are we doing this again? Come on. And it can get really frustrating. Ulatus made a point I found interesting, weird idea, but do writers not write more positive the worse the world is and vice versa? But maybe this is just an anecdotal and has no bigger basis. I don't know that it has a larger basis, but I think W.E.B. Du Bois really, like, as a powerful writer and as someone that I would, consider a leader at the time, like, that's a powerful thing to do. That's how you lead people. Like, hey, when things are tough, I feel like it is important to have that optimism. And when things are maybe not as tough, keep reminding people, yes, we're celebrating and we're going to enjoy this win. We need to celebrate this win. At the same
mhm,
time, there's still work to do. Um,
absolutely.
I think that, yeah, that's very important. Um, and is a testament to, this piece for sure.
Hmm.
especially with the context given by Juice.
Yeah,
Thank you.
no problem. There's so much in this that like um is very applicable to generations after this piece was made. Like it's one thing I love about one of the things I love about analyzing theory pieces and like writing from people back in like the 1800s, or like early 1900s, people from at least like a century or so ago, is looking at it and drawing, being able to like the parallels with their writing and what's going on today, like the conversations that I'm having with people nowadays, like they just like leap off the page to me and like hit me like, oh my God, like this is exactly what I was talking about with my friends like a couple nights ago. Or like this is the kind of idea that I was trying to convey in other words, not as in this like flowery language, not flowery, but like as this like well articulated language
Mhm.
and diction um, that I was trying to convey with my friends. Um, but then this writing, this person in this writing just consolidated all of the points I was hitting or trying to hit in a conversation I was having before, or even just like one I was thinking to myself was I'm like driving to school someday and I like read something last night or I go on Twitter and I see some post or whatever and I'm like thinking about it the next day.
Mhm.
um, I'm able to use these pieces as a way to contextualize and make sense of my reality and what's like going on around me, in a way that like I feel like I'm not able to like that is a comfort um, tool for me.
Mhm.
Just like something I've since I've been reading this theory and like just being open about it. I've been reading this kind of stuff since I was like, middle to like high school,
Mhm.
um, and it's helped me to yeah just like make sense of the world around me and to remember that like hey, all of what is going on, all the disparagement, all the bigotry, like none of this is these have origins in in our society, and here's where they are. Here's how people have been like tackling it. Here's a way to like contextualize it, to make sure that you know or you're able to like address these things as they come up to you and make sense of them and not feel like you are going through these things alone. And it's very, very edifying and very comforting for me. And I don't know, maybe that makes me weird to find
No,
comfort in that, but
no.
I
I
do.
I feel very similarly about feminist theory. And it's such a weird mixture of feelings. It's like, oh, well, this is what I was trying to explain. This is a good way of articulating it. It's so succinct or it parallels well, or sometimes like it's rooted back in these like when we're reading the piece by Marilyn Fry, Oppression, some of the examples you can see we've leaped forward, but we're still dealing with some similar issues. It's just the examples are different. And
Hmm.
I definitely feel that like sense of comfort at the same time feeling like, oh, we're still fighting that battle. So there's a mixture of feelings of like, we've come forward a bit, but it's the same battle. And it can be comforting and like, this is not super unique to me. This is something a lot of people who like have powered through and have been able to stand up and fight. But at the same time, damn, we're still here. Like, why?
Yeah.
Uh, so in short, are we saying if you like reading, go read theory?
Yeah. Go pick up some theory to make yourself feel better. That's your comfort reading. Like,
Fucking nerd stream. I swear to God.
hmm.
I did not expect this to get this direction, but I'm here for it because relatable, very relatable.
Yeah.
Juice, this piece, I really appreciate you bringing it. Um,
Oh, I'm so glad that we were able to go through this. Like I love these opportunities to talk with, like read through theory pieces and talk through them with people. Like it's like one of my favorite things.
well, hope
That's the nerd in me coming out.
nerdness, welcome. We're glad to have you here. Thank you. I did not mean to keep you for it is almost 2 hours. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for coming on and reading to us, picking the piece, giving us the context for it, and analyzing it with us. I really appreciate that. Um,
Yeah, it's fun.
and, as always, feel free to hit me up whenever you want to talk through another one because I love these times. I really enjoy having you on. So thank you.
Yeah, it's coming becoming a bit more difficult with like the reading that I have to do for school.
That makes
Um,
sense.
but then like also um I've been getting more and this is kind of this is definitely a tangent here, but I'm super excited, so I'm going to talk about it. Um, I've been getting involved with on campus because I started, for those who don't know, which is like most people, that I started at a new university this semester, and I've been getting
Congrats.
involved. Yeah, yeah, I'm so happy. I've been getting involved with a lot of the progressive and like activist focused groups on campus.
Mhm.
We actually had uh, the Black Student Union at my campus actually hosted Angela Davis for a
Oh,
keynote speech a couple like last month. Yeah, it was, oh my God. I'm so excited that I was able to see her talk in person, like and live as it was happening. And when I say, like, we talk about like doing reading or learning from people like scholars and thinkers and activists, and being like inspired by them. She talked for 20 minutes and I felt like I could go out and like do anything. Like I it was so, oh my God. She was uh she talked on so many different things. But what stood out to me, I guess more than others, was she was very she did not shy, of course, because she wouldn't, why would she shy away from talking about the current issues, like world issues that have been going on. And
mm,
she made it very apparent that a very distinct point that we should be in constant mindfulness of our comrades across, like, struggling in different parts of the world. So she mentioned Haiti as one of
mm,
the people, one of the things that's been going on over there, um, and like our community is not or should not be just relegated to our immediate surroundings, our
mhm,
countries or wherever. Like we have comrades, we have allies in different parts of the world that um, capitalism and like American exceptionalism, American like imperialism has taught us that we don't have any sort of link to,
mm.
and we should not empathize with. Um, I know that's bullshit. I think everybody in chat knows
Yeah.
that's bullshit.
We are
I
on
especially
the internet
yeah, like
and we're like,
we can
that's
make those
silly.
connections. We know this is terrible. This is not the way that we should be going about this.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, no, like it was she like it was such a great experience.
Powerful. Yeah.
Extremely powerful, and
I'm
I'm trying
jealous.
to. I w-
Dang.
I would be too. Like I was so I was so happy that like I was able to have this opportunity. And I didn't expect it when I first came on to campus like couple months ago. I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna get involved with some stuff. And bro, I was supposed to get involved with some stuff sorry about that, on campus. Um, and then I saw like one of the people were like, yeah, we're having end of the day. One of the Black Student Union reps were talking to me on campus, like, yeah, we're gonna have Andrew Davis on campus next month. I'm like, really, really? Um,
That's so
and
neat.
yeah, I've also been getting involved with like on campus rallies and stuff. I'm actually going to be tabling and doing flyers for trans youth in Texas
Oh,
on campus next after we come back from spring break, and I'm so excited. Uh,
wait, are you? I'm sorry. Are you in Texas or?
yeah, I'm in
Oh
Texas.
my gosh, you were in the belly of it.
Mhm.
Holy, thank you for the solidarity with the trans kiddos in Texas because, oh my goodness. Yeah, I heard we had a win regarding it yesterday, and I'm glad to see that. I hadn't
Mhm.
got to dig into it quite yet. So, chat, we might pull up the news around it and dig into it and just celebrate that win. But Texas is
Absolutely.
whew, Texas is wild down there.
Yeah, as we said, we celebrate those wins. We recognize where we progress is being made, or at least like conservatism is being halted in this instance. But we keep fighting, right?
Mhm.
We keep moving forward. We still realize we recognize that there's still work that needs to be done. Um,
Absolutely.
we don't lose momentum. We keep it going.
We sweep that into more energy and momentum. Heck yes.
Hmm.
All
So
right.
that's kind of like what I've been up to. So in saying that, I'll see about seeing taking a break from school life and coming on again and doing something like this again.
I would love that, especially as you get to, table and if you're having conversations and you want to come and chat about like just what's going on in Texas is if that's of interest, I would love to chat with you about that.
That's a
Um,
that's a great idea. I would love to do that actually. Yeah.
yeah, maybe we'll have to get into some like trans theory or something together. Like that would be
Ooh, I
fun.
would. Hmm.
But yeah, thank you, Juice. Thank you for your work, for your solidarity, and thank you again for coming on and having the chat. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I do
Absolutely.
this work so I can, you know, this is work that needs to be done, and it's work that I feel like I'm pretty good at, and I'm getting better at it. So um, through stuff like this, and ultimately and I'm kind of sorry for rambling a bit here, but this is ultimately what um, we play to the strengths that we have for the sake of progressivism and practice and whatnot. And I've been able to recognize where my strengths lie, what I'm good at, what I can bring to the table, and it's what I've gathered so far is facilitating conversation. Is at least one of them. So yeah, I'm down to keep doing this absolutely. And definitely next time we can talk about, as you said, something that's going on in Texas or another theory piece or whatever it is.
Hmm.
I'm here. I'm down. I'm ready for you. Ready for chat. I'm here for you all.
Thank you, Juice. And thank you for the mod work too. I appreciate that.
Yeah, of
All
course.
right.
Now,
We'll catch you around next time and I'll look forward to it. You have a good day.
are you too? And back to the ether and mod chat I go.
Oh my gosh. It's always a joy having Juice on. Oh, I'm so jealous about the Angela Davis stuff.